Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and I think good late night to some of you who are here. It's great to see you. We have interpretation today in Spanish and French and English. So please speak slowly and clearly so the interpreters can do their job. And I will try to do the same. But we've had great response. We had registrants from Haiti, Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, Honduras, Austria, and many others. So if you're just joining us, feel free to put your welcome into the chat, identify who you are, just to say a quick greeting. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Irene Hongping Shen, and I work with Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, also known as TUED. TUED is supported by the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies, where we are also housed. And I wanted to introduce Dr. Gregory Mancios, founding dean of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies, who will give us a few words of welcome. So I give the floor to you, Greg.
Thank you, Irene. It's my great pleasure to invite all of you today to this important conference. SLU is the 25th and newest unit of the City University of New York, and it's the only one that's dedicated to public service and to social justice. We have a three-part mission to provide higher educational opportunities to working people. Secondly, to help develop the next generation of labor and community leaders. And the third mission is to serve the broader community. And we do that through public engagement and through conferences, a journal, a radio show, a TV show, and various workshops that are available to our community. This, of course, is one of our initiatives, the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. We're very proud of this program. I'd like to invite you to learn more about our school and more about TUED. I want to thank Sean Sweeney and Irene and the entire team for its work with the school and with the global community. They just do great work. Today, we're here to discuss Mexico's struggle to reclaim its energy sovereignty. I understand there are almost 80 unions registered from 29 countries, 29 countries that are facing similar challenges. It's quite astounding to think of the vastness of both the problem and the interest in resolving it. So we're coming together here to find a public pathway to energy transition. This is an exciting forum, and I'm looking forward to participating in it, and I hope you are as excited as I am. So thank you, Irene. Thank you, Sean. And good luck to a successful forum today.
Thank you so much, Greg, for those words of welcome. And again, welcome as new people are coming in. For those of you who are new to these meetings, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy is an international trade union network that started in 2012 at the Rio +20 climate talks, with unions wanting to develop an alternative narrative to the green growth model. So 10 years later, TUED is made up of 92 unions from 26 countries working together with our close allies. And we take an independent trade union and working class approach to address energy transition questions. In addition to SLU, the School of Labor and Urban Studies, TUED is supported by unions and also the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung New York office. We have members of the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung staff here as well. So we welcome everyone here. So on behalf of the TUED team, thanks for joining and we welcome you to today's TUED Global Forum, Building Solidarity with Mexico's Fight for Energy Sovereignty. We're very excited for today's program. And so without further ado, I give the floor to Sean Sweeney, the coordinator of TUED, for a brief framing of today's discussion. Over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Irene, and great to see so many comrades from all over the world here. Irene listed a few countries only because we've never had, I think, comrades from Burkina Faso and Zimbabwe on the call, so we singled out those countries this time, as well as Haiti. These attendees of these forums know that we've been covering the Mexico struggle over the last year or more. About a year ago, I wrote an article in New Labor Forum called Mexico's Wall of Resistance, which was why the international labor movement and progressive community should get behind what the government is trying to do. The unions in Mexico, as we will hear, support what the government is doing on the energy sovereignty question. And to the best of our knowledge, Mexico is the only major country that has been willing to draw attention to the failures of energy privatization, both what they call the standard model and its more recent variants that has been promoted by the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the neoliberal policy complex. Many countries in the South particularly have resisted this agenda, but very few recently have been as explicit as the Mexican government in calling it for what it is, and that is a policy of betrayal and surrender in terms of energy self-determination, and also we believe the effort to really transition away from fossil fuels to a low carbon future. We believe at TUED, and we've had many discussions with our network on this, that if successful, Mexico's struggle for energy sovereignty opens the door to a planned energy transition to a low carbon energy system. This transition will take some years, perhaps decades, but it will be more efficient, more socially just than the approach taken by Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the president of Mexico, his predecessor, Peña Nieto, who tried to privatize the energy system in the name of climate protection. And this is the key to the policy debate. The World Bank and the IMF are pursuing a neoliberal agenda behind a climate protection agenda, which is very deliberately misleading. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. And we think the Mexico struggle has international significance, and trade unions and their allies, despite all the other things going on in the world today, they should be aware of what's going on and support the effort as much as possible. So I'm really delighted that we've got Walter Julian Angel Jimenez, the General Director of Clean Energies of the Mexican Ministry of Energy, known as CNER, S-C-N-E-R. And it's great he could spend some time with us today explaining the current state of where things are with the struggle to stop the privatization, reverse some of the laws that were passed 7 or 8 years ago. And I'm delighted to hand the floor over to the minister. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Yes, thank you very much. My name
Jiménez, soy el director general de Energía.
And I am the director of the NED, as Sean introduced me. And before anything, I would like to communicate a very warm welcome and greetings from the Minister of Energy, and I would like to greet and thank all the comrades who are here today NALE was formed and learned about the energy system from her struggle in labor union. So she's very familiar with our struggle. And we have an internationalist approach to this energy reform, and we are interested in uniting with all who are oppressed and exploited by neoliberal energy systems around the world. First of all, I would like to start at the beginning. Mexico has been living through a process of privatization of the entire system, not just the electric system, but also the hydrocarbon sector. And it has been a very systematic neoliberalization and privatization of the entire energy system starting in the 90s, but which really peaked in the reform of Peña Nieto in 2003. What we are observing today is a response to a package that was sustained and promoted by the United States to guarantee an energy supply from Mexico to United States industries, US markets, and overall the control of our economy. Because as we all know, energy is the pillar of any country's economy. And so these were policies, the neoliberalization policies were promoted from the White House. And this is something that we've been seeing over the course of the past 30 years. It's not just a response to one reform, but to a whole systemic approach to economy and to energy. However, I'm going to focus today my remarks on the electric reform that we are promoting today, again, in response to this long process of neoliberalization. Mexico has a history of public energy prior to privatization. And the CFE, which is the Federal Electricity Commission, was pressured to give long-term contracts to private companies. And from the reforms of 2003, what we saw was the opening of energy generation to foreign multinationals, private multinational companies, to generate and distribute energy. And again, this was a process beginning with some initial contracts and expanding to longer term contracts and to more and more private companies. And this accommodated each time more the, I'm sorry, he's on mute now.
Excuse me.
And we've seen a recession in the participation of the public sector in energy, in Mexico's energy mix. Currently, 99% of companies that participate in the generation of electricity in Mexico are foreign companies, especially Spanish companies, US, from Germany, Portugal, China, and a series of other countries that have constituted a monopoly, private monopoly, that controls 41% of energy generated in our country. And this poses great risks, of course, to the ability of the state to plan, and also a risk posed to the state's obligation to provide energy as a right. This also provides, again, difficulties in planning and to national security, as well as to energy sovereignty. Because when a country loses the ability to have control over the distribution and generation of energy, it loses its ability to plan into the long term. If there are emergency situations that arise, and these are situations that, for example, in the pandemic, interrupt daily life, these corporations have demonstrated great indolence to the management of energy as a human right, energy when it is most needed, energy in cases of emergencies. And not just COVID, but also when we have faced natural disasters, these corporations have shown an indifference to the provision of energy as a right. And that is why we are dedicated and motivated to reclaim energy and to reclaim the costs of energy, as well as the ability to generate and distribute our own energy and take back control over what is basically a national security issue, as well as an issue intimately related to the public good, the common good. For example, this communication that I'm having with you right now is possible thanks to electricity. And I won't enter into the details of what you already know regarding the importance of electricity, but I think that that is essentially the framework that motivated this electric reform of the current administration. We had to align our common political grounds and understand why exactly we were standing against the 2003 neoliberalizing reforms. The state used to, of course, sit down with the electric corporations and, as I mentioned, provide, and first and foremost, care for the interests of those corporations. Today, we have more than 4,000 judicial complaints against the foreign companies and these complaints are a result of corporations taking advantage of state policy and rising prices beyond what is acceptable. Only in the electric sector have there been more than 1,000 complaints against the foreign corporations. And of course, the courts have played a big role in this energy reform. Some sectors of the energy reforms have been shut down by the courts, and right now we are fighting to push forward the electric part of the reforms. What we are facing today is lawfare, essentially, which is the use of legal tools to stop and to create obstacles for the administration's intent to push forward this reform. And again, the primary interest of these private foreign corporations is to protect their share of the market and guarantee their profits, as well as maintain a certain control over their share of the market. And at this moment, with the war that is unfolding in Europe, we see all the greater the importance of defending our energy sovereignty in Mexico so that we are not so affected by international events. In the reform of 2003, what we saw was the displacement of Mexico's sovereignty, like there were constitutional reforms that displaced energy sovereignty over the energy sector. Today, Mexico has paid more than millions of dollars in subsidies to foreign corporations, in addition to further subsidies that we had been carrying even before the reform of 2003. And that came from the modification law of 1992 that modified, once again, the energy framework. And these were millions and millions of subsidies in the foreign corporations. This was essentially a business. Mexico's energy system was a business to Iberdrola and to so many other foreign corporations. This was essentially a business opportunity for them. And that is what is at stake for these corporations. They don't want to lose their share in the market. And they want to, of course, take advantage of the absence of any type of regulatory system or framework that would hold corporations accountable. And as we know, the absence of regulation and accountability for corporations is always passed down to the Mexican working class. Costs are passed down to workers, and that is why this reform is historic. Today, the judicial power is obligating the government to implement the energy policies of the prior administration. And who pressured this? The White House, different politicians in the United States, corporations, Mexican right wing. And we have the documents, of course, to prove the diverse pressures that the Mexican courts received from the United States. This has affected the stability of the energy system. Today, we have more than 100 daily alerts in the National System of Control, which is the system that administers energy and tracks inflows and outflows and brownouts. And of course, when we see 100 daily alerts of energy inconsistency on our grid, that is not of concern, but it is of concern apparently to our courts that we don't fully guarantee the interests of maximizing profits of corporations. So it is important to state that the Secretary of Energy of the prior administration, who was a man that made business deals with public funding, established through a decree in 2014 that all renewable energy is the one that was constructed after 2014, leaving out the possibility for the Federal Electricity Commission to manifest that it has renewable energy and to apply for new certificates of renewable energy. Today, due to that decision, the Federal Electricity Commission pays millions of dollars to foreign corporations to buy renewable energy certificates. And that's why people say, oh, the Federal Electricity Commission doesn't have any interest in developing a renewable energy. But these are chains that Federal Electricity Commission carries from the very Mexican state and prior administrations. So we have to take that into consideration, and we have to respond with informed historic facts when these attacks come. We are currently trying to develop from the Federal Electricity Commission different forms of renewable energy. That is a priority for us. But of course, any stable system must generate must pull from diverse energy sources. And the biggest risk to that stability and to that diversity and the ability to plan long term are the interests of these corporations. That is why we are putting the brakes on corporate interests in our energy system. And when we put the brakes on their interests, they have accused us of everything, of burning hydrocarbons in historic records. And that's not true. Mexico doesn't even have the built-in capacity to reach the levels that they are accusing us of. They are also accusing us of negating climate change, of not reacting to climate change. It's very important to clarify the following. What is energy transition here or in any part of the world? The energy transition is a substitution, the gradual substitution of one energy system, primarily fossil-based, for another energy system in which there is a prevalence of generation of electricity through renewable and nuclear sources. But that requires over 30 years. Energy transition is not to put solar panels everywhere. It isn't to put wind farms everywhere. That's substitution. That's technological substitution. That's what we call it in Mexico and in any part of the world. And energy transition has to understand the cohesive, collective energy system, again, as a whole, and it has to look at efficiency, how to reduce inefficiency, have a deep planned understanding of what energy is consumed in what sectors. And what they have raised against us is a misinformation campaign to say that an energy transition is just as the ability for these corporations to be able to put renewable energy, solar panels and wind farms, and then onto our grid. That is not an energy transition. That is false. And that is what John Kerry, that is John Kerry's legacy in this energy reform. There was a document that demonstrated how Peña Nieto's government committed itself to the privatization of Mexico's energy system. And Richard Kluger in 2002 participated in that document, in those meetings. John Kerry is the essential operator of this privatization in the early 2000s. And nevertheless, he is the one to come here and talk about climate change, even though they are responsible for making Mexico dependent. Mexico, of course, reduces way less emissions than the United States. So thank you very much, John Kerry. But we would like to reclaim our energy system and to generate renewable energy projects, but that are part of a planned transition. Only then can Mexico advance in a way that expands our control over our economy, over our development, without prioritizing corporations that sincerely have, as I talked earlier, no interest in the Mexican people. And of course, there are commitments in COP26 or COP21 where states are obliged, and there's pressure put on former colonial states like Mexico to commit to lower emissions. But it's important to say that Mexico, regardless, is doing a transition. We are going to try to meet our climate targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but we will only do it insofar as it is good for the long-term interests of our people. Yesterday, it is important to point out that the Supreme Court of Justice in Mexico validated the constitutionality of the modifications that we did to the industry law. However, there is also a negative signal that we see. The majority of ministers voted against the constitutionality of these modifications. Constitutionality was approved only because of a particular process that said that there needs to be a majority by 8 ministers in order to provide, in order to rule for inconstitutionality. So they fell short of 2 ministers. But it is very important to note that the majority of the ministers and of participants in the judicial branch are in favor of foreign corporations' interests. And we've seen that in Brazil, we've seen that in many other countries where the judicial branch is really sitting in as representatives of the interests of private global capital, and that are ultimately then responsible for increasing rates of poverty in our countries and the reduction of our state, our public sector's capacity to provide for the needs of our population. And so that decision was taken yesterday and is very important to know as a development in the struggle for energy sovereignty. We have to continue to move forward. The Constitution is displacing the interests of the Mexican working class, and it is subservient to corporations. We have to change that character and correct it so that there is a guarantee, as we've seen in other countries that have changed their constitution, to prioritize the public good. However, at the moment, again, we have a judicial branch that serves the cycles of capitalism and that are deciding and ruling that the interests of private capital are placed above the human rights that we have every single Mexican to construct our own future. That's why we say that there simply cannot be a failure in this reform. We have to push forward. We have to overcome the opposition. And what are we asking the international working class and this audience here today? We are asking for internationalist solidarity. We would like to receive statements, pronouncements, and the person that introduced this meeting today. We need to have a very clear-eyed statement that stands unequivocally with the energy reform in Mexico. and the struggle for energy sovereignty. And when I say that we need to be clear-eyed about it, we need to be able to spell out that currently the Mexican energy system serves the interests of private capital. 85% of the Mexican, in polls that have recently come out, 85% of the Mexican population is in favor of the modifications that AMLO is pushing to the energy system. So this is really the will of the Mexican people, and that's why the international working class has to stand in favor and in solidarity with our people. We have to be able to say this not just in Mexico, but all over the world, that our rights and our energy systems are more important than the bottom line of corporations. And even in Spain and Italy, where these large multinationals are based, that plummet our country, even there, they are facing these struggles, where corporations are prioritized above public good. This process that Mexico is uplifting is an example, or it can be an example, to how you can reorder an energy system, and an energy system that was in the grasp of corporations. The same, for example, is true in Colombia, where we had a similar neoliberalization of the energy system, and it is possible. It is possible to address those problems and to put them in order and to reclaim an energy system and to call things by their name, say where the energy system can become more efficient, more democratic, and that ultimately the reason we are doing this is to respond to conditions of precarity and of poverty. I celebrate this meeting today. Thank you for allowing me the possibility to intervene. We are living through truly historic moments, and of course we are, for that reason, facing pressures from the United States, from Europe. But it's worth noting that the energy system in Mexico is controlled by BlackRock, Blackstone, and other large funds that go from location to location around the world. And less than 25% of investment that these corporations, when these corporations make promises of investment in the economy and jobs, we have to, of course, be very critical of their promises. We have to look at history and see what their track record has been, and have a people that, as in the case of Mexico, has become more and more politicized around the topic of energy. It has become a flag to raise and to insist that if the legislative powers don't approve the AMLO's reform, then the reform will have to be won in the streets, with the working class, with social movements, because it is non-negotiable. It is a necessity. One way or another, we have to reclaim our energy system. It is an energy system that is extremely valuable. And we know the worth that it has for our lives, for our economy. And we will defend energy as a human right. So having now completed my time, I will leave it there. Thank you very much, comrades.
That's excellent. Thanks so much, Walter. I'll just introduce myself as I come in now. My name is John Treat. I also work with Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. I think that was a really powerful contribution from the ministry there. And I think despite a few little technical issues with the connection that made it a little bit challenging early on, I think we could not have asked for a better input from the ministry to give us a sense of the nature of the struggle that's underway there and what's at stake. And because of those, the importance of that fight for, as an example, for similar struggles in other countries, and the importance of this call today and of having the kind of turnout that we've had. So thanks so much, really absolutely invaluable. And we look forward to more and more useful conversations in the future as we go forward. I'll mention quickly that there are discussions within TUED about issuing a solidarity statement that unions would be able to sign on to. So keep an eye out for that in the coming days and weeks. And we will see what we can use that to build as well. We're going to turn now to contributions from some of the unions that are involved in both in TUED and in the fight in Mexico. We're going to hear from representatives from two unions in Mexico that are closely following and involved in these developments. First, we will hear from Silvia Ramos Luna, who is Secretary General of the National Union of Technical and Professional Petroleum Workers, UNTIP in its Mexican acronym, UNTYPP. Sylvia spoke at our first Global Forum on Mexico almost exactly a year ago now, which was called Resist and Reclaim Mexico's Fight for Energy Sovereignty. So, you know, the conversation around these crucial issues was already underway last year, and Sylvia played a really important role in helping us get oriented to these issues. So I will hand over to you, Sylvia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this forum, and above all, with solidarity with our government's struggle to recover energy sovereignty. So I want to talk a little bit about the history for those who are new to this topic. On the 19th of December 2013, the Mexican people suffered one of the most brazen robberies in its history. They stole nothing less than our energy sovereignty. The people's resistance was not enough to stop the theft of our energy patrimony. That day, the Congress of the Union approved the energy reform proposed by then President Enrique Peña Nieto that modified Articles 25, 27, and 28 of the Constitution with the objective of making Petroleros Mexicanos and the Federal Electricity Commission, which are the two main energy companies in our country, become also that private companies would be the ones to carry out their functions. They eliminated the generation of energy from Article 28 of the Constitution, and since electricity generation was no longer strategic, private companies were allowed to generate electricity without investing in transmission lines, favored by the government to obtain stratospheric process, which Walter mentioned just now, at the expense of our state-owned company, which had to stop the operation of its hydroelectric plants so that the private corporations could operate. The plundering was enormous. The extraction of oil wells was authorized so that foreign companies could carry them out, keeping the oil and paying very little for the crude oil and without paying for the facilities that were already built. So on September 30th of last year, 2021, President Andrés Manuel López Obrador sent to the Congress of the Union an initiative not to reverse the energy reform, but to give some viability to the CFE. It is an electrical reform because it rescues the generation of electricity as a strategic activity, which should not be generated by individuals or private. However, they are being allowed to generate up to 46% of electricity, which is equivalent to the generation volume of all Latin American countries except Brazil. As workers, we are for energy generation to be 100% by the CFA. However, we understand that existing contracts, it's not so easy. We hope that there will be more of those contracts renewed and that as they expire, they be canceled. Upon the presentation of the initiative, just like all the initiatives of the president, the Mexican press, which like all traditional media is controlled by the oligarchy, turned to a campaign of lies and defamation. Of course, this isn't new. They always do it to defend their interests. They do not intimidate us. Although we recognize that they damage valuable projects such as, for example, the presidential initiative. We, as oil engineers and energy workers, support the president's initiative because it rescues a little of the energy sovereignty that was stolen from us in 2013. It is not what we demand, it is not the full extent of what we demand, but we understand the correlation of forces in the Congress are not favorable because although we have a simple majority in the chambers, what is required for the constitutional change is 2/3, and that is not what Morena currently has. And it requires negotiations with other forces in the Congress that are very polarized, and of course, the panorama is complex. The electricity reform is necessary because if the current dynamics continue, the CFE would disappear by 2040, and we would be like Spain, with a government hostage of the energy companies, raising prices whenever they want, and leading our country to an energy poverty that would put us in a dilemma of eating or paying for electricity. Its approval is also important because this initiative rescues lithium for the development of the country. Currently, lithium is not included in Article 27 of the Constitution, and therefore it is being granted to foreign mining companies, mainly Canadian. To date, there are 36 concessions, 26 of them are Canadian companies. And lithium, as everyone here knows, is mainly used to manufacture batteries for electric cars and batteries in general. So it is obviously a very important mineral that really should be under state control because it is key to the energy transition. Another of the right-wing government phrases is that it stopped providing maintenance to refineries in order to improve fuels. In 2018, the last year of Enrique Peña Nieto, $300,000 million in diesel and gasoline were imported. And that is why we support the construction of the Dos Bocas refinery and the purchase of the Deer Park refinery, as well as the modernization of the 6 refineries we have. Because to stop sending Texas $300,000 million a year would allow us, of course, to have economic resources to advance in the energy transition and in the rescue of energy sovereignty, which is another of the proposals of the president's initiative. He proposes in his initiative the energy transition, the sustainable use of all energy sources available to the nation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and components, and states that the necessary scientific, technological, and industrial policies will be established for this transition, driven by financing and national demand as leverage for development. So again, this $300,000 million would allow us, if we reclaim it, to have a more successful energy transition. We are aware of the risk of exceeding a temperature increase of 1.5 degrees Celsius. That is why we support the energy transition. Unfortunately, the energy transition does not suddenly eliminate fossil fuels that emit CO2. That would be impossible. In Europe, they continue to consume large quantities of natural gas, which is one of the main greenhouse gases, and their efforts to replace fossil fuels is moving forward. They show significant progress, but they are absolutely insufficient. Hydrocarbons will continue to be a part of the energy matrix of all countries for several more countries. And if we still have oil reserves, we will use them to rescue our energy sovereignty because to transition, to advance the energy transition. To us, it is very clear that energy is not an economic sector, but a structural dimension of the economy with an impact on all social life. It is a strategic sector. It is not a common commodity. So it is a matter of sovereignty and national security. Energy is human rights, as well as said, it cannot be a subject to the laws of the market, since the market is based on the principle of profit, and profit and energy cannot be a commodity. It is strategic and must be under the control of the state. That is why we must fight for its renationalization. All energy, regardless of its source, whether it's wind, solar, nuclear, geothermal, hydroelectric, thermal, must be in the hands of the state. It is necessary that this reform be approved because it would allow us to stop the drain on CFE's finances, which in 2021 alone costed 223 billion pesos in payments to private energy generators and 200 billion pesos for having its generators detained. We, the oil technicians and professionals from the first line of defense of energy sovereignty, say that the electric reform is going to happen. Until victory, always, we will win.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Again, a really useful contribution that I think just reinforces some of the messages that we were hearing from Walter and from the ministry, and I think really gives a sense of the kind of resolve that the unions involved around these issues have shown and are committed to continuing to show. Lessons there for all of us, I'm sure. Following Sylvia, next we're going to hear from Jose Humberto Montes de Ocaluna, who is the Secretary of International Affairs for the Mexican Electrical Workers Union, or SME in its Spanish language acronym. ESME has been part of TUED for some years now, and Humberto has also been an important point of contact for us in understanding what's happening in Mexico and how unions are orienting themselves to these issues and that struggle. Humberto, I'm going to hand over to you. There we go.
Yes, thank you very much. Greetings to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you for the invitation. I'd like to build off of the interventions of my co-panelists here. The reform of AMLO the objective is to reclaim a certain part of energy sovereignty and to defend the public sector over private interests and revert processes of privatization, which were lengthened for 30 additional years. I think there's a very important element to highlight here that has been part of national debate of AMLO's policies, and it is that over the course of 30 years of steady advances in the privatization of our energy, there was always a public resistance. And this is important to know because it is now playing a critical role in the final stages of this reform. When push comes to shove, the workers will show up for our long-term interests. And we have formed coalitions, a united front against the privatization of the electric system. And this experience, the united front, is very important because it allowed us to avoid constitutional reforms at the end of the 90s and in the beginnings of the 2000s, which were going to further privatize our system. This allowed neoliberals governing our country to arrive to the conclusion that privatizing our energy system through the legislative route would mean a public coalition with the United Front. And so when a president that stole the elections from AMLO successfully on October 11th, 2009, raided the offices of ISME and fired more than 44,000 of ISME's workers. That obviously gave us a signal of what was at stake in the struggle. We received some questions, including, how did ISME decide to support this reform? And in the commemoration of our struggle against the mass firings of our workers, ISME decided in a general assembly to publicly back the energy reform of AMLO. And of course, there were lots of internal debates, political debates, but we pushed through those. We debated within the union and across social movements to come out publicly with this support in favor of the president's initiative. And there were lots of arguments, counter arguments that required us to have a deep understanding of what was at stake and what the consequences would be for workers. And that again required a very deep technical understanding of the implications of the energy reform. That political education is a part of this struggle and a part of what made ISME come out in favor of the president's initiative. We have also been organizing and calling from ISME to the general public to participate in this public debate that has been taking place behind closed doors in courts, and to make it public, to take it to the street. And so that is why I am highlighting the role of social movements on the streets, trade unions on the street, together in a united front. Because from our perspective, this isn't just a task of the government, it is a task of the trade union. It is a task of working class people to reclaim the destiny of our country and to propose a counter model that replaces neoliberalism with one that prioritizes our interests and our potential. That is why we are coming out against, in favor of this reform and against previous neoliberal policies. In these debates, we have also planted the importance of enriching the debate. You know, just as other unions in TUED, we have said energy is not a commodity, energy is a human right. And we have followed the TUED debates and discussions, the importance of democratic control of energy. And what we believe is that it's also important to have a respect for the autonomous indigenous communities in our country, and this has to be part of the united front. There has to be an important contribution of communities in shaping the future energy model. This would, of course, right now we are looking and we are discussing the restructuring of a public ownership of an energy system. And part of the demand in that restructuring has to be the rehiring of initially 44,000 workers who were fired, but who today continue to be 14,000 workers on strike 9 years later. And so one of our demands is for those workers to reclaim their positions in the public sector and as political agents of the energy reform. Now, how can trade unions and TUED support us and stand in solidarity? we talked about the importance of doing a statement, and I think there should be two pillars to the statement. The first that declares that TUED and trade unions that sign on to this support the demands and the objectives of AMLO's energy transition. And a second pillar, which in my opinion is a class-based demand, in solidarity with ISME's workers and requesting that ISME workers be rehired into the public company of CFE. And so those are our two ways to stand in solidarity with our struggle for energy sovereignty. And I agree with Walter that there's a lot of pressure and opposition coming from transnational corporations, from the United States, from the Mexican oligarchy, and that pressure, that combined pressure, again, including of the United States, is important to recognize and to understand that this energy reform is not occurring in a vacuum. It is occurring in a geopolitical context, and that it requires, therefore, our organization and our coordination across the international working class to reclaim what belongs to us and what was robbed from us during neoliberal governments of the past. And we will continue to participate in all the protests and debates in Mexico around the reform, not just until it is passed, but after our president, Martinez Barza, has been meeting with Morena leadership, and basically we know that ISME has to continue to occupy space and to participate and weigh in on these discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Humberto, for your insights and also for the long history of fight that ISME has been part of in the struggle for energy sovereignty, but also workers' rights and protections, and against the neoliberal agenda of energy. So now we're going to move to hear from respondents, also comrades that have been working on supporting public ownership of energy and the fight against privatization. We're going to start with comrades from Tunisia. And first we'll hear from Ilyas Benamar, who is the Assistant Secretary of Studies and Legal Affairs at the Federation of Electricity and Gas, UGTT, in Tunisia. Ilyas has been working with TUED for the last period in the trade union program, as well as being active in the network. And we will also hear from Wassim Labidi, who is a member of a working group for energy democracy in Tunisia. And Ilyas and Wassim have been working together in the same working group. And so it's a good example of a coalition of unions and civil society, social movements coming together, fighting against privatization and for public ownership. So we'll start with Ilyas, and I give the floor to you.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening. First of all, I would like to turn to our Mexican comrades and particularly the affiliates of SMO and UNTYPP structures to express all of our support and solidarity as Tunisian unionists, and we extend our hands to you so that we can preserve together a public and sovereign energy sector there are many similarities between our two countries, although I had hoped that I would have liked my own manager to speak like Walter. I salute you, I greet you, and I want to thank particularly the TUED team that has trusted us as a Tunisian activist and unionist. Thank you for inviting us to this type of event. It is hugely important for us to be here, all the more so that our country is facing a new wave of neoliberal measures affecting particularly the electricity sector to which I belong. This wave of measures seeks to liberalize the electricity production, using renewables. It is supported by the World Bank and other financial institutions such as the German bank KfW. These measures are essentially of regulatory nature, and they seek to create a so-called electricity market based on renewables. This trend also seeks to reduce the role of the STEG, the Public Utility for Gas and Electricity. It seeks to limit its remit to transport and distribution of electricity. The STEG, so the Public Utility in Tunisia, celebrated its 60th anniversary last April. It is now threatened to become one among many businesses in the sector in Tunisia. It will lose its advantage of being a unique and historical operator with only one objective: to provide low-cost electricity to the Tunisian people. This approach made it possible for us to reach a rate of electrification of 100%. Historically, we have had one precedent of a private operator in Tunisia, as I said, since 2002. It was a public-private partnership by a consortium, Japanese and American. This was the state forcing its way through in order to privatize a part of the electricity production. And the STEG was forced to buy the entire production of this operator throughout an unfavorable power purchase agreement, so that this actor generates juicy profits. The unions since 2002 have fought tooth and nails against this. I have taken part in a drafting of a detailed study on the harmful effect of this type of relationship for the interest of the Tunisian people. And as Public Utility for Gas and Electricity, we have successfully prevented this consortium I just mentioned from extending the concession that was granted by the state. And we've also regained possession of the private combined cycle station that we're using, and very soon our teams from the STEG will take charge of operation and maintenance, which means that very soon the entire national electricity production will be 100% public. This success gave us a breath of fresh air to keep up the fight and revise the regulation seeking to create private businesses to sell electrical energy to establishments. To strengthen its position, trade unions from the electricity sector in Tunisia have decided to stop connecting renewables private station to the national grid until that piece of regulation is revised. We've also launched a strike of 2 days on the 23rd and 24th of March to call for the repeal of these measures taken by the state seeking to liberalize the sector, and also so that we can claim more professional rights for the workers. To finish, I would remind that I had the honor to take part and to draft also the trade union program for a public low carbon energy future with more comrades, especially members of TUED. I insist on the importance of this document and on the need to disseminate it amongst trade unions in the world, and particularly in countries of the South, where the the neoliberal onslaught is more brutal and the power dynamics is completely off-balanced. Why not even complement this document with more detailed, exhaustive documents on potential alternatives and on practical solutions to fight against privatization? Once again, I greet you and I thank you for your attention. I will pass the floor to my colleague, Wasim. Thank you, Ilyas. Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for giving us this space of exchanges on such an important topic. Energy sovereignty. I would like to express all our solidarity and support to our Mexican comrades. Their continuous fight against the privatization of energy, as well on the topic of energy sovereignty. In a world that is heavily influenced by the neoliberal thinking, it is hugely important. The Working Group for Energy Democracy was founded in 2020. We work to vulgarize, to raise awareness around topics of energy sovereignty, especially as regards food sovereignty and energy democracy in terms of free and unconditional access to these elements. Energy has a strategic dimension, a dimension that is separable and must be separated from commodification. We also work on research action methods. We write articles seeking to raise awareness around energy sovereignty, but we also conduct field work. So we try to have direct contact with the people, try to attract their attention to current energy topics. As regards Tunisia, our government, which says itself to be sovereign, whilst at the same time negotiating with the IMF and the World Bank on conditional loans, very soon we will enter a new phase of structural adjustments. It's what we've seen in '86 and 2012, and the impacts are still felt. At the same time, the Tunisian government made it possible to create 5 solar stations in the center and the south of the country. I myself, I come from a mining town, phosphate mining area. The state just granted the creation of a huge solar plant on a massive area of 400 hectares. It is an agricultural land that was grabbed by the state. Peasant communities were expulsed from there, and the concession was given to a French-Moroccan consortium for the installation, as I said, of solar panels. As Elias was saying, the topic of energy is essential, it is strategic. You can already feel the liberal onslaught manifested by direct foreign investment. Among the 5 new stations, 4 of them come from direct foreign investments, seeking to exploit, harness our natural resources at the STEG, the public utility, as a national public utility. We cannot understand that we were not consulted in this process. We think that the topic of international solidarity and the case of Mexico is hugely important. As regards the Tunisian experience, it is quite short, which is why we are always happy to consult other models of struggles. We need to have inputs, experiences from our comrades. I think that the Mexican experience in this regard is very much advanced, and it's also radical. A very clear stance was taken politically. If we look at the guidelines of the IMF, the World Bank, the neoliberal thinking on energy, it's all very clear. So I think we need to pay very close attention to what's happening elsewhere. By addressing rural communities in the center, the south of the country, we can tell how efficient the neoliberal thinking is in these areas in terms of how much wealth will create for you and so on. Which is why we need to build up our reasoning, our arguments, so that we can show the Tunisian people that with a properly sovereign energy sector, we can produce everything that we need with no need to resort to foreign investments. And to bounce back to what Comrade Walter was saying. He said, Mexicans must know that we're not fighting alone in this. And I very much agree with this. The neoliberal capitalist onslaught on the energy sector is felt everywhere. Tunisia is part of it. So we must do more to disseminate the Mexican experience. So what we'll do is, during our field work to come, during our interventions, our conferences, Elias will present the Mexican case as a struggle for energy sovereignty for the interest of the Mexican people. Again, I wish to thank you for giving me this space to intervene on a hugely important topic. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Wasim. And also thank you, Ilyas. Thank you both for joining us from Tunisia and sharing with us your experiences on the ground there, and some of the successes that you've experienced in fighting against privatization, and also your continued fight against the neoliberal agenda of private renewable energy companies under the climate change banner. And I think you are absolutely correct, Wasim, in saying that Mexico, the example of Mexico, is an inspiring and unique one that we can really look to as a model as we continue to fight in our own regions and countries against privatization and for public ownership and energy as a human right. We are going to move now to our next respondent, also a close ally to TUED. Muriel Marcelo is the Federal Secretary of Europe and International Advisor for the National Federation of Mines and Energy, CGT, in France. FNME CGT has been very instrumental in working with TUED and PSI and a whole group of trade unionists in a task force on public energy in developing the trade union program for a public low carbon energy future. The links are in the chat. And so we welcome Marielle as our last respondent and speaker for this program. So over to you, Marielle.
Well, hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to greet each of you here in the name of my federation, FNME CGT. I think that following the debate we have just had today, all we can do is reaffirm our complete solidarity with our comrades from SME, whom I recently had the pleasure to meet at the and our Congress, as well as other comrades struggling for public energy in Mexico. And it's important to remind you that the long struggle led by our comrades in Mexico, and in parallel, all we can do is support the policy of the current Mexican government, as Wasim has said, because it gives a possibility to reestablish the energy sovereignty of the country, and also reiterates the notion of general interest and interest of the nation and of the people, because that is the struggle we're also working with in France. It has said in the debate earlier, energy is a common good, a universal common good that has to remain in the hand of population on all continents. And we have seen that capitalists have decided to turn energy into a merchandise by imposing the liberalization of public services. And in France, we remain extremely attached to essential services and the notion of public services. And every day, nowadays, everyone is speaking of energy transition, but the struggle against climate change, it remains an illusion unless there is public ownership of energy resources, and without a clear governance and democratic control of the energy by trade unions and by citizens. We need this struggle so that we can move forward all together in an international coalition for this struggle. It is for us all together to plan our global response, because the neoliberal processes defend a strong state, but its objectives are a complete economical deregulation, which is not what we aim for. Our government and the leaders, the CEOs of corporations are attacking, have been attacking for several years the energy sector, and against our public against public ownership and public management, who have a true history since the Second World War. And these struggles have been led for many years, and they've been following the recommendations of the IMF or the European Union. And since the years 2000, they have been destroying our sector, gas corporation, energy corporation, electricity, and EDF, which is our national entity, is trying to demonstrate through a project called Hercules, names that come from its history. And with trade unions, with workers, with other trade unions, we have been struggling for now 2 years. We've been fighting to oppose this privatization. Unfortunately, to simply oppose privatization is not sufficient, which is why we have decided within FNME, we've decided that on top of only building opposition, we've decided to build a counter project, which was called the Progressive Energy Project. And it is around this project that we have launched an important public campaign, a public campaign which we aim to make as visible as possible. We've called on parliamentaries, European parliamentaries, the media, the European Commission, our comrades from trade unions with whom we are working with, our allies, and we have managed to put a temporary moratorium on the project. But we know they will come back very quickly to try and enforce it. We know that this project has not been abandoned, and as you know, there are legislative elections in France in the next couple of days, and we know they're expecting the election, the presidential election, to restart this project. We therefore remain mobilized and attentive. What is interesting today is that our government speaks of the necessity to have energy independence, but we do not share the same values, the same path to this objective. And this is where we need to make a clear difference. It is interesting because the Mexican government is doing the same thing with its trade union. It is supporting them in their struggle, because we feel that in order to reach our objectives, and this is something we'll have to see later in the debate, we need for our campaigns to be visible, because they are essential and they will only be efficient if they are visible, which is why we need to multiply such campaigns. We've also supported the international trade union campaign against low carbon energy, the campaign led by TUED, and it is we've tried to work with our comrades from international trade union movements in order to build the trade union program with a low energy, low carbon future. This program is not just a list of demands. It explains what needs to be done to recuperate energy and to end with market logic. In 2007, FNME CGT was already saying, through Sébastien Ménez-Pillet, our general secretary, was saying that the inspiration of the energy sector, which was more and more complex, could only affect and endanger the energy security of Europe by leading to rise in product costs. And 5 years later, so that was 2017, and nowadays we see that the future is even more uncertain and dangerous as far as the energy transition is. So we are proposing a future, a path to an energy transition, and in FNME CGT we support a planned transition to a low carbon energy, because the transition, the dependency of Mexican economical sector to carbon energy is an example. We in Europe already had issues with our energy dependency before the situation in Ukraine escalated. We see there is an immense rise in prices, as well as a food dependency, which we also experienced during the COVID crisis, and a number of societal crises that derive from that dependence. While building our energy program at FNME, we've tried to build to the question of our rights, the protection of the environment, the continuity in terms of distribution of energy, and we should not forget the democratic governments that has to go through the power of trade union and citizens through all decisions that are taken on essential goods. We need to return to long-term policies which are necessary for us to anticipate the needs, our future needs, and not to leave behind any of the workers as well as the most marginalized citizens, because as we are seeing today, the energy transition is currently reserved to the wealthiest of the population, which is why energy transition has to go through a low carbon energy with a management of prices. Beyond this, there is the question of investment, research and development, which are all essential aspects. And we would like to add to this the matter of the reindustrialization of all of our countries for all dependencies, whether it is energy sovereignty and sovereignty of any other product which we may have suffered from during the COVID crisis. So we agree with the President López Obrador when he says we are not against clean energy, we're against dirty businesses. And I think I will conclude by being aware that many challenges need to be taken on. And in order to win in FNME CGT, we are delighted to work together with the ministry and trade unions in Mexico in order to plan together the necessity for public energy, public ownership, and citizens management in order to carry these axes together with TUED. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marielle, for those final comments. And what a great ending to a really fantastic event today. I have to apologize that we do not have time for a discussion as our meeting time has come to an end, and we have actually gone over a little bit, and the interpreters are on a tight schedule, and we don't want to keep them beyond their designated time here. So it was really quite an excellent series of interventions today. It is both inspiring and exciting that there are so many regions around the world where the fight against privatization is active, and people on the ground are really pushing and promoting and recognizing the need for public ownership of energy, not just for advancing our human rights and access to energy, but also for understanding to reach climate goals, we absolutely need to have a public system of energy. We want to thank again, in particular, Walter from the Ministry of Mexico, of Energy in Mexico, for your really fantastic comments, and also the steps the administration is taking to advance energy sovereignty in your country. And we will continue to discuss and develop a way to build solidarity internationally for your efforts, while also bringing together and uniting trade unions around the fight for public energy and democratic control. So thanks everyone so much for coming. If you are interested in having your union sign on to the trade union program for a public low carbon energy future, please definitely email me and we can help facilitate that process. It's a very good document that many unions have worked on together, including many of the unions that are here today. So again, thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next TUED Global Forum. If you would like to unmute yourself and say goodbye, please do so. Thanks so much again, and take care.
Hi all, well done.
Thank you,
Thanks
everyone.
everyone, bye-bye.
Bye.
And thank you to all the speakers
Thank
and the
you.
interpreters.
Yes, great job, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.